Jeremy, man, thank you so much for coming on the show here today. Really excited to have you on. Could you start by just telling us a little bit about yourself?
Oh gosh, it's so funny. You sent me that question and I asked my wife, I was like, who am I?
Very philosophical, right?
Yeah. You sent me down this existential, kind of trip, but let's keep it high level. So my name is Jeremy. I'm 45. I live in Halifax, Nova Scotia. I'm a husband. I'm a dad. I suppose my area of interest is DNA, and I've spent about a quarter of a century contemplating, that life's code, and that's really I would say what motivates me day in and day out is the code of life, and when expressed well, how it manifests in the performance of a lifetime.
I love it. Yeah. So talk to me. How did you get started in the world of physical preparation, as we call it? How did you get started just in like the workout and training space?
This probably would have gone back to being a kid at, I baseball was my passion, let's say, when I was really young, and I played, organized sport. And, I would say I was gifted, I could throw hard, I could run fast. And, so that resulted in me playing multiple positions and probably taking on a bit too much. So, for example, I would pitch, and then on my day off, I'd be on third base, and then if you need me in the outfield, I'd be, throwing balls in from the warning track. And so by the time I was 15, I had a labral tear, and, I was, I think, effectively done. I mean, because I didn't know what a labral tear was. I just knew that I couldn't throw anymore. And so, I got pulled in other directions for various reasons. But if I think about, again, the physical realm, my next sport of deep interest after baseball and the baseball injuries is actually boxing. I didn't throw too many overhand rights, and uppercuts didn't hurt, nor did hooks or jabs. So, I worked in that space for a while. And, I should say, actually, I before boxing, I got into more martial arts in Taekwondo, and I had a back issue as a result that, I couldn't even run. Turned out I had like a spondylolisthesis, which is like a weird, kind of genetic anomaly protrusion that basically crippled me to anything beyond a brisk walk at the age of 15, 16.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So anyway, I did boxing, and I was passionate in the space of, genetics, let's say. And so I started to really, ramp up on my academics, and I found that my boxing training and competing, that is, you spar, in order to compete well and win, you generally spar with guys who are twice your age, weight, and experience. And you got to go home and do homework after that. It didn't work so well. It's like taking 1,000 soccer balls in the head. So, I kind of, hung up my gloves, so to speak. But I recognize the role of physical activity and physical preparation, like not just in the competitive arena, but just in the arena of life. And when I went to university, I was looking for something, where it was socially acceptable to spend 20 plus hours a week training. And I found track and field, and because lo and behold, all the boxing, kind of tightened up all my transverse abdominal muscle, and it turned out I was a pretty darn good sprinter. Okay. So I trained for 60 meters. I had great coaching, and as a walk on at ranked 700th in the country, and with a little bit of training, ranked 7th and conference champ. And I went to the Olympic trials, and that is about as far as I went with that. But that whole journey just taught me the power of precision. Especially something like 60 meters. Well, you go back to boxing, go back to pitching. There isn't much room for error. and in a huge sense, large sense, particularly pitching, it's an individual game. So same with boxing, same with sprinting. So there's a certain level of personal responsibility, less capability of like leaning on your teammates. Although that's a whole new layer of interpersonal synergy, which is amazing. Sure. But yeah, I mean, I'll just pause there because that was kind of my start, and physical preparation is really something that I do now every day, non-negotiable as part of my life. Yeah,
I love it. I love it. Okay, so last but not least, give us your career arc, because as I'm going through your media kit, I'm trying to follow all the things, all the various stops you've had along the way. So, in a nutshell, could you kind of highlight some of your career path and then give us like a little overview as to what you're doing today?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want to be you, right? Reading my bio. Yeah,
There's a lot, man.
Well, it's and then it's like we had this conversation when I started, or when we prior to press and record, is I've been around the block, and I've had a lot of different influences, and what I'll say is, I mean, if I go back to my first job ever, it was being a paper boy, but you go to fast forward to where I am now, and I'm working in really as a consultant in the health technology space, and I also do coaching with some high performing entrepreneurs whose vision I believe in, and I think they need somebody in their corner. So I'll bring some human performance principles to select few individuals. But I go back to the whole paperboy thing, and then the health consulting now, and there is continuity there because it really is about giving people access to information, and hopefully the right information for life changing decisions. So I think one of the things we talked about was, DNA as a service. Like what is that? I think that's what I have, most recently, most notably, in my LinkedIn bio, let's say. And DNA as a service is like, you've heard of software as a service, right? It is a technological capability that, cost essentially is amortized across the population because you have, volume in terms of access to the information. So case in point is when I built Athletigen, and that was previously a company that was focused on delivering DNA insights to high performers, most notably, Olympic athletes, professional athletes, or people who are on that trajectory, let's say, and or performance longevity as a point of interest. So basically, athlete-minded people, or people with an athlete mindset. But to build the supply chain and the technology to deliver, your DNA insights of various markers, that whole thing, cost me like $10 million to set up and disseminate. Wow. Right. Well, so yeah, it's like, you've got to source the collection kit, and you've got to build the kit logistics and the software to support that, and the drop shipping and the return shipping, and ensuring that you have data privacy and security protocols in place. And then it was interesting. It's like the actual secret sauce and interpretation, which is the most valuable thing to the end user, is the thing I'm spending the least time on. So
wow, that's crazy.
Yeah. And so, foundationally, however, all those things that I just talked about, they need to be in place. And so, now I've since exited Athletigen, but I do work with, sequencing.com company, Silicon Valley based company, that has basically built all that infrastructure and is now focused on bringing it to different market segments. So I work with them basically to make DNA usable across different segments. So that's what I do on the consulting side, and it really turns into more of like an ecosystem development, right? So
Yeah.
it's understanding the different industries.
So
And
one thing I would love to hear is just what made you get started in this space, right? Like, how did you start pushing this idea of like DNA as a service? How did you go about creating Athletigen, like from the ground up, right?
Yeah. I was a professor of nutrigenomics for a while, a couple years, and you do that whole life thing, like professional pursuit thing, and you're like, oh, maybe this isn't. Even though I was training to do this, I don't know that I should be doing this. And
right.
Anyway, there was a company, that happened to be in Nova Scotia, where I was a professor, and they said, hey, we've got these mice that we've selectively bred for 10 years for reproductive lifespan, and they were able to double the reproductive lifespan of mice. It's like basically like humans having babies until they're 120.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, and the company was called Performance Genomics, and even though there's no real industry, or at least there wasn't a discipline of like sports genetics or performance genomics. Like David Epstein hadn't written the sports gene yet, right? We weren't thinking like that,
right?
It was really all about disease and disease prevention, or population genetics, et cetera. So, this organization recruited me to be their chief technical officer and basically unravel how what were the DNA elements of these mice, and so I was able to uncover those, and then it was about thinking about who might benefit from this, and that was neat because that was often that is the step I would say that academics can do better at, is on the knowledge translation. So it's like, okay, I've got these cool publications, but how is that translating to affect change?
Absolutely.
So yeah, I saw that and I was like, hey, you know what? Just what we started talking about at the top of the call is like, I got this real passion for human performance, and here's this DNA thing. So Athletigen became this opportunity for me to fuse my two passions of ethics and genetics, and and so of course me being the guinea pig, right? I did my own DNA first to see if this was going to be useful, and lo and behold, I was like, wow, like here's all these things about my DNA that if I had known, I would have selected a different path as it relates to, you might say like the sport that I chose, but really maybe not, but definitely it would affect how I trained.
Okay.
So broad strokes, I have a monster truck engine in a, like Chevette chassis. Right. And so,
right.
Yeah, it's like,
it's a great analogy.
Yeah. I like look at weights and do speed training and just get instant results. And the lag on the tendons and ligaments is just ridiculous. And so, 7 surgeries later, you think I would learn, but it's like, I would say knowing, for example, that I had, various markers, gene markers related to, let's just say, a less structurally integral collagen forming, would have made me think and pause about how much load I put on the system compared to my training partners, let's say. Knowing that I don't absorb vitamin D as well would obviously affect that from a diet nutrition point of view, or being a non-negotiable in terms of winter training camps, like getting some sun, because my injuries always happen in the winter.
Really?
Yeah. So that probably to an extent coincided with, that's when a lot of the intensity was and when the prep was happening, but then also the sun and the shorter days, et cetera, and the DNA predispositions. So yeah, that's how I got to thinking about DNA and performance, and how athletes might use this. And then I went down and I formed a partnership with, it was the World Athletics Center at the time in Phoenix, and we worked with incredible coaches who could take this information and integrate it into their already, highly personalized, high touch programs. And then you bring in this tech, and now you've got high touch, high tech confluence. Fast forward, the athletes that partook in the program, if considered a country, at the 2016 Olympic Games, they would have placed fourth in the track events, or fourth or fifth in the track events, and that's literally a few hundred athletes. So like a per capita result compared to other countries, pretty gosh darn amazing.
That's pretty darn good.
Now I'm not saying that's all because of the DNA insights. It's an integral program, but it certainly didn't ignore DNA, and it did advise. One of the main features was like training load and rest, and more preventative prehab, massage therapy, certainly some nutritional interventions around micronutrient deficiencies. And then, maybe confirming some previous suspicions around, let's say, training response, particularly like the multi-event athletes, like where might we better allocate our resources as it relates to training different energy systems and your response, et cetera. So it was really, the way I looked at it is it was taking, training and making it more strategic, more like chess than like, checkers, where time is your, non-renewable commodity, let's say. Yeah. And so it's like, how do you best utilize it based on your code? So that's how I got to Athletigen.
Yeah, no, I love it, man. So now keep in mind, when some people that are listening to this show, they just work at a random gym in Iowa or Minnesota, nothing against those states, just giving examples. If they're not working with like high level Olympic athletes, I'm sure they're thinking, oh, this is so far fetched and I don't know how I would use this. So one thing I would just love to hear from you is like, for the lay coach that is listening to this and is like, oh, that sounds really cool, I would like to integrate that. Could you give us maybe like some insights or like how-tos? Like if somebody wanted to start integrating this type of stuff, where would they even begin? Because I do this for a living, right? And I work with high-level athletes, and while I've known this is like out there and available, I wouldn't know the first place, even how to get started or how the process would work.
Yeah. Well, the process is pretty simple in terms of, how do you get sequenced? It's really just a swab, right? It's like a buccal swab, cheek swab. And it like literally takes a couple of minutes, to swab and, drop ship and put in the mail. So you mail order these things. So, biases, fully transparent on biases. Like I work and I'm consulting for sequencing.com.
Sure. But
I'm still comfortable saying like that's, as far as I can tell, going to be your most comprehensive solution. What I mean by that, it's a whole genome solution. So maybe I'll give like a little bit of context on what that means.
Yeah, that'd be great.
And then okay, yeah. So if we go and rewind, like, 1990s, when the whole when the Human Genome Project initiative started, and came to its first publication, and I think want to say 2003, it costs around $3 billion to sequence the human genome. Yeah.
Wow.
That was that project. And then we got to a point where, you started to see companies like 23andMe pop up.
I remember them, yeah.
They were selling you, these little kits, but it was not the whole genome. It was like it was like 0.1% of your genome on, stuff that maybe people were interested in. So say more like disease predisposition, et cetera, or as we saw later, ancestry. But like I said, 0.1% of your genome. There were a few, cutting edge organizations like Celera that were around at the time, but the cost, like for Steve Jobs to get his whole genome sequencing done, was like around hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Oh my gosh!
So now
it's pretty cost prohibitive.
Yeah. So now and so you actually think about 23andMe when they went live, it was like $799. And their whole investment strategy, was such that they were selling data on the back end, so they could sell the kits at a loss. So that's why people might think, oh, $99 for your genome. It's like, no,
Yes.
we're not quite there. That was really just to create a business model. The true cost of getting your genome sequencing today, the whole genome, keep in mind it was 3 billion, is now around $399 for every single nucleotide.
Wow. Wow.
So if you go to a site like sequencing.com, what you'll see is, I mean, there are 3 flagship products that I really like. So the first one is you call it next gen disease screen. Basically, it looks at your entire genome and scans it for all the known around 16,000 pathogenic markers, right? And you go through that first hoop, and you're like, okay, what are my predispositions? What have they been detected? Let's get on a plan to, for me, say, for example, reduce my likelihood of developing age-related macular degeneration or hearing loss or whatever. So stuff I bring into my GP and say, hey, here are my predispositions, heart disease risk, like those things.
Sure.
So that just becomes a part of your like general maintenance, like your 10,000, miles checkup on your car. But now it's personalized. But so that's next gen disease screen. Then there's like Genome Explorer, so you can go in and the genome speaks for itself. So you can kind of like Google your genome if you knew something ahead of time that you wanted to look for, family predisposition, what have you. So you can dive in that way. And there are no other tools like that. And then, the last one that I really like is Health Scan, which is basically your genome is compared to the science every week. So you get access to the latest discoveries, which is incredible. But I think the things that most listeners, so I've been geeking out on DNA for a quarter of a century. So what I like may not be what other people like. What I will say is, in addition to those 3 softwares, there's a marketplace of app. I wouldn't say app, a marketplace of DNA reports. And so these would be DNA reports as they relate to, physical predisposition, training response, injury risk, nutrition, cognitive performance, negative drug interactions. So like pharmacogenetics, drug allergies. And so you can really peruse the site for, hundreds of different reports to dive in on. And so just to back up, it's you go to sequencing.com, you buy a kit for $399, you choose your plan, you send in your saliva sample, and now you're talking to your genome. Now, the exciting thing is, this used to be really, really overwhelming, because if I go and I buy any one of these reports, like some of these reports are like hundreds of pages, and it's like cool to have a Wikipedia on me, but like, am I ever going to read it? Like, so now enter AI, and the discussion is just game changing, because I'm actually like looking at, an interface that I built for myself using Chat GPT. Like this is my own interface. This doesn't exist. It's not available yet, but it will be, soon with like sequencing AI, but I don't want people to think that this exists. It's not quite there, but I can start to have the conversation. So I can say, based on my DNA reports, like, what are my injury vulnerabilities, right? And so now I can get a summary. It's like, well, hey, here's your heart health and cardiac risks, and it goes through those bone health and injury risks, inflammation and recovery, muscle joint health, nutrient sensitivities. And then it's building me an action plan. Well, it's like, now, here's your action plan. Here's what you might do as a result of this. And, then you can imagine your work that you're doing. You just say, okay, well, here's how I train my athletes, and here's the program periodization that I use off season for my basketball players. How might I adjust this based on each player's DNA? And now you're into precision at scale. That's DNA as a service.
Dude, that is so cool. I mean, I'm just thinking about, these basketball players that I have in, and I just think about, some of their injury histories, like you alluded to. Some guys, it's connective tissue stuff, right? It's always connective tissues. And you can tell, right? They're like these bouncy, elastic creatures. But now you've got something else on the back end that's telling you, no, this is part of who they are. And then maybe here are some strategies that can help you mitigate some of that risk so that they ultimately can stay healthier.
Yeah. I've changed my outlook on DNA quite a bit over the years where, you're obviously more than, like, DNA is not destiny, right?
Right. Right.
And, but it's not just DNA and environment either, right? So,
right.
Give you an example of DNA environment is like, so I have a risk of, lower vitamin D. Well, I don't absorb vitamin D as well. So I have a risk of the consequences of a, long-term, suboptimal vitamin. I'm not going to get rickets or anything, but my inflammation is going to be up and I'm going to get injuries.
Right.
And autoinflammation, that's in my family history. My mom had MS. So it's like, I can change my environment by going closer to the equator. And I can mitigate a lot of that risk. But that's not enough. I think there's the DNA in the environment. So I think there's like a Venn diagram, like two circles overlapping.
Yeah.
But then think about it, the other third circle. So it's a true kind of triune Venn diagram is the behaviors, right?
Yeah.
And so what we're saying here is, okay, I know this thing in my code, and I've got let's say some kind of divine motivation in me that says I want to be a basketball player or track athlete or whatever, right? It's like, okay, but now I can do that responsibly through my behaviors. And so what is the thing that we know is that, we are what we repeatedly do. And so what does that mean? The habits are the things that are shaping who we are becoming. And now I can choose my habits based on my DNA and based on where I am, and I can't change my DNA yet, but that's coming, right? But so yeah, who am I becoming? Is like, well, even though I really want to do that extra set, I know the injury happens. It's always the last one,
right? Or
I know that I have a predisposition for diabetes. So as much as I love carbs, that's something I'm going to build out. And so coming back to how this applies to sport is, look, man, we're all invincible at like up to age 15, 16. But then you start to like put some power behind what you're doing. And it's like weakest link is going to break, man. And, now it's like you're making money and you want to spend it on all these fringe entertainment things. It's like, no, man, spend it on like a Tempur-Pedic bed. Go to bed early, optimize your sleep, like honor the temple that's getting you those results. And how you honor it is by getting to know it. And we can now get to know it at a whole new level, which is just, it's just mind blowing to think about where it was and where it is. So,
yeah.
No,
so I love that.
Does that make sense in terms of how like a coach might use this? I kind of went off around $3 billion to vitamin D, but
it's totally fine because I think that's something we're all striving to do, right? As coaches, the less subjective, right, our assessment process is. That's what this comes down to, right? Yeah. This is like a super high level assessment process.
Yeah.
But look, if I can come in the gym and I can determine with a certain level of objectivity, these are the exercises that you're going to do well.
Yeah.
These are the ones you are not going to do well. Now I'm going to be that much more efficient when I'm coaching you, right? So now you're just really getting under the hood, and it's not just like the exercise selection. It's like, no, look, this is your genetic predisposition.
Yeah.
These are the things we need to know about you. And I didn't really talk about it up top. I was going to ask you about genetics versus epigenetics for people that aren't familiar with those terms. But like, hey, okay, these are your genetics, but what switches can we turn on or off to maximize your results with whatever you choose to do, right?
Well, right. So yeah, good for bringing that back, because that's, I think, where I was going with the habits, right? It is effectively like that's the whole, like, we are not that which we are today. We're that which we repeatedly do, and so therefore we are our habits. And so you look at something like smoking, and it's actually not even just say you or I were smoking, but our parents smoking. As it turns out, so first of all, an epigenetic change is, quite simply, the let's call it the change in the access of genes to be expressed, right?
Okay, yeah.
So it's not a change in the DNA code. It's a change in how it's all folded up and accessed by the proteins that express the gene into other proteins. And so, if you smoke, you're activating a cascade of catabolic and inflammatory processes. And, as it turns out, those will be changed at the epigenetic level. And those changes will actually be passed to your children. A really, well-documented example of like what the effects are is intergenerational effects is like what we saw with the Dutch hunger famine. So children that were in, right. Okay. So So children who are in utero, who, basically their mothers are subject to starvation and war. And so guess what? You fast forward next generation or two generations, and children, of that time who were born after that time are more predisposed to obesity and paranoid schizophrenia. And it's like, it makes sense to store in times of scarcity, and it makes sense to be paranoid if people are trying to kill you. Yeah. So, and those are just changes in gene expression profiles that lead to the changes in those behaviors. So you kind of come out with this like preset, they say that the sins of the father kind of thing, right? So, that's why it's so important to, know thyself. And I suspect in the future, we should see epigenetics become much more commoditized, right? Because you start to see, at least I'm noticing this, like in my daughter, is like, are those tendencies like me, to furrow my eyebrows and to be contemplative, or to be easily excitable, or, to get like rowdy before bed and not want to sleep. I'm like, are those real things, or are those just random things? I don't know yet. Right. But I think it will be, interesting to get to a point of, profiling behavior so that we can just understand what we're starting with and choose the direction we might want to go. Yeah.
I love it. Okay. So I want to circle back now that I feel like we covered that base. I'm fascinated by the use of AI.
Yeah.
Right. And everybody's worried that, we're going to have the Terminator on our hands here in the next 10, 15 years. But I want to think a little bit more positively, right? You talked about ways you're using AI to kind of help, sequence your own genome and get your own training information. How do you see that playing out on a macro scale, right? To where we can use AI to help optimize our performance if you're an athlete, or increase your health span if you're somebody that just wants to live a longer, healthier life.
Yeah. I like what I would like to have personally. And let's play your scenario, like no doom and gloom. Right. The singularity, which is coming, and let's say like the singularity is really defined by the rate of technological advancement and its cost. Where it's basically on this exponential upward trajectory where it's going to just become like a straight line, and like everything is cheap. Like everything is cheap. Everything is fast. And, that kind of brings its own kind of like I really think about it like the social and economic restructuring as like kind of the first change. So, basically it's like, well, whatever is repetitive and can be automated will be. And so, so if what you do is repetitive and could be automated, start building your skills. Right. And, where it comes to coaching, there's a lot that's repetitive and automated or automatable with coaching, which I hope that doesn't scare coaches, because really I think what it opens them up to do is, more of the, kind of human interpretable, uniquely kind of art form interpretations, which, a lot of those will even become, automated at some point. So, maybe we're just kind of always upping our game creatively, working outside on the fringe because we've got this like backdrop of like order. And so anyway, that's just kind of an ode or nod at the coaches. I mean, I'm a coach. I'm not concerned about AI putting me out of business. Right. So, but then I think about like personally, like my personal utility. And I keep going back to like Iron Man. Like I would love to have my own personal Jarvis where, it's like he is endowed with all my personal information and, he's got my blind spots, right? So, when Iron Man's testing his suit and he's like driving up into the atmosphere and Jarvis is like, dude, no, stop. Like you're going to freeze up and you're going to short circuit. And he's like, I'm still going to go for it. And he still does.
Right.
So, hopefully, we maintain our agency and we are allowed to ignore the AI for our, for the betterment of, let's say, creativity. There's that other scene. I think it's like Iron Man versus Captain America, where he's like trying to fight Captain America, and you're just not going to beat Captain America. But then he puts on like the AI fight pattern recognition, and then he wins. So, I think there, as it relates to athletic performance, like I think there's like that kind of, technology that's going to shorten the trial and error process. Even think about how video analysis has helped with that, right?
Sure.
Even just in a single session where you're like trying to communicate to an athlete the technical aspect of what you would like to see, but then videoing them and saying, okay, do you see what I'm seeing? And they're like, oh,
right.
Now whether they're a visual or kinesthetic learner, that's then up to you to figure out how to activate that. But, as I say, I think that there's and this is just me personally. Okay. I'm not, I say I'm not an expert in AI. I've been thinking about AI for 10 or 20 years because I would use AI to discern biological phylogenetic relatedness in analyses that I do. So I understand the power of AI and how to use it.
Right.
And let's just say, like, I'm about as expert as the next person insofar as I don't exactly know what's coming next. There's so many tools to keep track of. So it's a little bit overwhelming. So I try to bring it down to the simplest thing. And, it comes back to like, there's a book I was reading. I think it's Daniel Pink. And it's I can't remember the name of it now. And there's another one now. I can't remember the author, but I know the title. But it's a more beautiful question. And so I think that's really what it comes down to is getting better at the questions that we're asking, and being more clear on what do you actually want out of life, because you're going to get all of this, like all the work, all these like mundane tasks that used to take up so much of your time are going to be removed. And if you believe that you're endowed with a creative potential, the question is what do you want to create? And now you've got all these new tools at your disposal, and so hopefully it's some version of heaven on earth and guided by love kind of thing, and so
that would be nice.
We said we were going to go through the constructive scenario where the Terminator isn't going to take over. It's not going to become self-aware, but I think there's so many areas that are just going to spin off on this. Like I think about my area that I've been thinking. So I don't just think about DNA in the context of human performance. I think about it actually in a way that just kind of like blew my mind when I met my PhD supervisor, which was, it was, don't think about genes having been evolved to confer some kind of benefit to the host, humans, like, being stronger or injury resistant, whatever. It's like, no, imagine that genes have evolved to be transferred. And it's not saying that that's true, but actually there's a version of that that's true when you think about viruses. Like that's their whole thing. Like that's their whole strategy. So, I think about DNA in that way. It's literally intergenerational information transmission. And so I said, we're not changing our DNA yet, but we're totally sci-fi, by the way. Like, I think we got at least a decade of human performance and optimization that's going to be really cool. So just a little footnote there is like, we're super sci-fi right now. But yeah, I do see like gene splicing, eradicating disease. And then that's not so sci-fi. I think the more sci-fi stuff is like gene splicing, genes from other species, and we've seen that. Like we put, I don't know, I think it's like antifreeze genes from salmon in strawberries, so they survive the frost.
Really?
You can imagine photosynthetic genes in humans, and then you harness sunlight for energy. So, like I said, we're way out there right now. I want reel me back to the audience here.
No, I like it. I like it. I like thinking. Well, first off, great Marvel movie references.
Yeah, you can tell I spent a lot of time with Marvel.
No, I love it too. Yeah, I love it. But I just like having where are we going? Like, what are the potential options here? Yeah. And one thing I'm really interested in, because you've dabbled in all these different spaces. Yeah. Right. So you've had time around elite athletes, right? We're talking Olympic caliber athletes. And I know now you're spending a lot of time with what I would describe as high performers as well, right? In their own right. We're talking C-suite execs, entrepreneurs. What are some of the similarities you see between those two groups? And then how does somebody like you come in, especially on maybe more the high performer side, the execs and people in the business world? How do you come in and then help them level up their game?
Yeah. Great question. And let's see, the simple answer would be, how are entrepreneurs or execs similar to athletes? And if I would say the athlete mindset, you might say they're goal oriented, but it's more than that. I don't think athletes get enough credit for being creators. When I think about artists, I had a great conversation with Dan Paff on my podcast, The DNA of Things, where, he talks about actually his role insofar as he's a coach, and he sees movement as one of the greatest expressions of human creativity. It's an art form. Yes. And he said he gets to do that. He gets to show athletes how to bring that out in themselves. Right. And so they create the performance of a lifetime. Okay. Well, the entrepreneurs that I'm working with are creating a future. They're creating a version of themselves. So what do they have in common with athletes? Well, they have vision, right? Or at least they want to have vision. And the ones that struggle oftentimes are the ones that lose the vision for the mission. And so that's always, a fun reset. But so yeah, and it's getting to that vision is what's critical, because that's what's going to get you through hell, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Is that first creation, right? So what I would say is, before I even get to that, there's the basics, right? So I think about really three basics in call it the private realm or the private victory, and so far as the physical, the spiritual, and the mental. So those three things I think are, as far as I've experienced, they're consistent in my entrepreneurs and in the athletes that I've worked with. There is a huge social emotional side on the relationships that often goes untalked about. Because of so much focus on results. So much focus on results, sacrifice of relationships, that's a careful harmonization that you constantly need to be thinking about. And so, but let's just go on the private side of things. So the physical side, it's what are the non-negotiables in making these rituals? So I talked about habits before, right? So it's what are these things that are the habits that we agree that you are going to integrate into your life, because it's about who you are becoming, right? And it's just go and let's work on what you're already doing. It doesn't need to be perfect to start, but let's make it consistent. And then, you start to build in aspects of more some training that's more strategic based on their goals. Like they're not trying to be basketball players, right? They're not trying to be triathletes. So you got to be careful. It's like, well, what are you trying to do, and how is the physical training specific to activate the cognitive aspect of what you're trying to do? And then you won't go too far without a personal vision, and that's highly spiritual. But I would call that that's the vision statement, right? So
yes.
It's very different from a mission statement, because you call a vision statement into being when you're lost, you're off the course. So that's something that I really work with the entrepreneur to build and to pull it out of them, pull out on their experience, because it's a very private, very sacred thing. And you see athletes will do that with their prayer oftentimes before competition. Some higher power that you acknowledge, some higher vision, future version of yourself that you're aspiring to be. And then on the mental side, there's like a lot of stuff you can talk about, like meditation, et cetera, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about more on the planning. So like I really like the 4-year Olympic periodization program, and I'll bring in macro, meso, microcycles of not just the physical, but like of all aspects of their humanity. So generally I build that into like a pyramid type of structure, where the lower pyramid is, their true kind of personal inner turmoil of self-mastery and play, and recognizing that a creative balance there, you get that. And that's how you kind of walk that straight and narrow path. And then, on top of that, you are building your relationships with your family and friends. And so we build out personas to bring it from the abstract to real. And then, there's the work and there's the career, and how are those things balanced? And then on the top tile of the pyramid, so I guess the fourth layer, you'd call service. Well, what are you in service to? And then what sits above that is the vision that we're building. And so we constantly make sure that we're aligning everything around that. And without that vision and purpose, you don't get too far. And so oftentimes, entrepreneurs are crazy, right?
Like, yes, I'm aware.
Athletes are a little crazy too. They're a lot crazy. That's like you're trying to do with like 0.1% of people. What if you don't make it, right? Like that's kind of the adversity that athletes, entrepreneurs, artists, frankly, I've got a few artists that I work with, that's what they're dealing with. And so once we develop that vision, once we develop like a personal operating system, actually say that's like the critical element that's missing. And I think you probably touch on this in your coaching is start with a default operating system, but you're going to learn pretty quickly you need one by design for you. And we've already just learned, hey, DNA is an important input and everybody's different. So, so it is about designing that operating system, for the founder based on, first higher order performance principles. And then once you've got that, then it's about then I take on the role of like corner man, right? Because now these guys, gals, are going out into the arena, they're taking on the world, and they're getting beat, and they're shouldering forward, and it's like, okay, well that now it's like, hey, as a fellow entrepreneur, I can work in your corner, and there's a fair amount of coaching and counseling that comes from that is outside the realm of clinical practice. Which is, and like I do have like a support team if that's what I need. But these folks are not dealing with bereavement. They're not dealing with anything clinical, although it's arguable. Like I say, maybe there's something wrong with you if you're going to do these things that are unlikely to happen. So I think, the biggest thing is that the chance of success is so low, and they go anyway. And I would say that is definitely one of the things that I see as a commonality. But you know what? Like as a coach, I love that. Like just to be able to support somebody through that. Cause like I had a great coach and I know what it means to have somebody in your corner like that will support you to do this thing that most people would most people that love you would tell you not to do because they don't want to see you get hurt. So,
Right.
so there's all of that dynamic that I see in entrepreneurs that to me speaks to a lot of the things that I saw in athletes mainly. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Okay. So how do we find a balance, right? Because you've worked with, again, high performers, whether it's athletes, execs, whatever the case may be. How do we take these people that are so geared and so driven to push, right? And we know there's a cost of business there.
Yeah.
Or how do we take that and then help this person find some level of health, wellness, longevity, and tie it together? Because, yeah, man, hey, it's great, if you build this amazing company, but it sucks if you die when you're 45.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So how do we marry those two concepts? Can you marry those two?
Yeah. I think we can. I mean, I do. I
do too.
Yeah. I'd like to say that I'm seeing that in the entrepreneurs that I work with, where, so I'll give you an example. Like I'd work with hockey players, right? Professional hockey players, NHL players, in like similar to you get them for like 2 months, maybe 3.
Right.
And I mean, the first month is just untangling everything, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then it's like, maybe we'll train we'll sharpen your strengths, and then maybe we'll get into some weaknesses. But, I'm blessed to have worked with track and field athletes, so I really get that kind of periodization. So I'd really do much more, obviously, individual type training. And so here's the thing I ran into is the athlete's ready state would just be so incredible because you pulled all these, principles from working, one-on-one with athletes. Because let's face it, if an NHL player is 70%, they can score the game-winning goal in the Stanley Cup final because they got a good team supporting them, right? And by the way, everybody else is at 70% then also because it's been a long, hard season.
Absolutely.
Usain Bolt's 70%. He's not making a high school final.
No.
Never mind the Olympics. So, and the truth is, entrepreneurs, a lot of them I work with are solopreneurs. So they do feel alone. So, you do got to, first of all, show them that they're not. But then get them through those darker periods. And I think the way you do that is by, emphasizing the light at the end of the tunnel. So coming back to the hockey players, I would send them back with like readiness 10 out of 10. 2 weeks into training camp, they'd be calling me like, oh, the trainer's doing this and this doesn't make sense. And you would do it this way. And I'm like, dude, okay, I'm not a strength and conditioning coach for the team. I'm your performance advisor. And the work that we did was designed to get you to Game 7 in the Stanley Cup Finals, God willing, right? And there's so many things that we can't control. But we controlled all the things that we could. We gave you these practices to get you through suboptimally, as optimally as you can given the conditions. So I think there's that. Like you've got to really acknowledge the toughness of the season, and the same thing kind of applies to entrepreneurship. So I rolled out the hockey period. It's like, well, here's preseason, here's in season, here's playoffs, and here's the Stanley Cup Finals. And like you can break down every sport like that in terms of where does the top performances where do they need to come in? And so I think it's about once you get past the whole like, oh, my hair's on fire and there's all these emergencies, because you gotta put that out first. Once you get past that, you kind of lift the founder's head to the horizon, and then hopefully, again, to that mountain, to that pyramid we built together. And then what we do is we start to stretch out time, and we say, okay, look, like, hey, now we're not planning a week. Now we're planning a month. Now we're planning a quarter. Now we're planning a year. Now we're planning on a vision of 4 years for this life thing that you got coming out. So I think time and the seasons within time, and accenting and emphasizing the right things at the right time is how you get to performance longevity. Because, Usain Bolt, he only needs to run 9.58 once So it's about figuring out when is that, and not constantly being in 9-5-8 condition all the time. It's like, by the way, it's like once in 4 years. So as much as it feels like a sprint in entrepreneurship, it's not. Like it's a marathon sprint kind of thing. And so I think I think there's a big mindset shift with that. And if you get that one under control, a lot of the anxiety around anticipation will go away, and a lot of the running on cortisol goes away, and then we get a little more strategic. So I think, full circle, full stop is focus on the seasons of the venture and activate accordingly.
Dude, okay, this is such a great point, and I hope people are understanding this, because the analogy and the example you used is beautiful, right? Usain Bolt has to be in that kind of shape one time every 4 years. Right? In the physique world, everybody looks at a bodybuilder or a figure competitor or somebody, they look like that one day, twice a year or once a year. And ultimately, whether we're talking about athletes or high performers in the business world, the people that ultimately break, I find, are the ones that just have not figured out the work-rest balance.
Sure. Yeah.
Like think about the athlete that, no off season, no breaks, they roll right off the back of a season, they get right back in the lab, and then midway through the next season, they're broken. Same thing with a high performer, right? Somebody that just never takes the time to back off the gas pedal, find those gaps or find those windows, be more strategic. It's just brute effort. Those are the people that ultimately, I think, burn out.
Yeah.
So I think that's just such a great point on your part, is like kind of picking and choosing your battles and being more strategic in how you lay out your training or your life program, whatever the case may be. Yeah.
And just to make it more practicable for the people listening, I actually had Dr. Eric Coram of AIM7. Have you met him yet?
No, I've heard of him, but I've not met him.
Yeah, I was chatting to him a week ago or 2 weeks ago. AIM7 is like the aim. I think it has to do with what are you aiming at 7 days a week, and that's going to change based on the exact things you're talking about. So what I talked about was the ideal, right? Is like ideally, here's where to exert your efforts, but there's day-to-day variation, right? And so now we can start to look at things like technology, and this becomes again the high-tech, high-touch confluence where you can look at your resting heart rate in the morning or your HRV in the morning, and you get enough of that longitudinal data, you can say, okay, well, I really am going to listen to this HRV data today because, if you can afford it, like if it's a training day, right? Absolutely. I mean, some days it's like, well, my HRV tanked and too bad, I have to get up for it. So, but you only have so many of those in the bank. So I think integrating some of these wearable solutions that will point to your readiness, so AIM7, I guess they're focused more on pickleball. I don't know if that's available to consumers, but you use whatever, use your resting heart rate, use a poor man's version, put it on your jugular and count in the morning and get a trend going. And that's a pretty good indicator. An app that I found useful, now I can't remember what it was called. It was a sleep app. It was a really good one too. It was. I gotta give you it to tease to your user.
You're good.
So what they measure is sleep debt. It's Rising is the name of the app. Rise, RISE. I don't work for them. I don't get any commissions or anything.
Kickbacks.
But it'll actually just look at your sleep debt as a metric, and predict your readiness. And then, so the readiness is giving you an indication of, you're flirting with injury and burnout the longer you're at a depleted or an increased sleep debt or a depleted HRV or resting or an increased resting heart rate. And so I guess it's bringing it back to, those kind of, micro habits then is like, well, what am I doing to push things back the other way? And again, that's where the coaching comes in, where, like, remember I told you at the top of the call I was a walk-on and I was ranked 700th in the country and I got down to I did that in 3 months. Why? Because I had because I had a coach that taught me the balance of work-rest ratios and listening to my body. And it sounds very cliche, and all these tools are really cool. Even the DNA is really cool, but the point is, it gets you to a point where you don't even need that anymore because you're so in tune with your physicality, which, by the way, is turning over every 10 years. So you get a chance to make a new body every 10 years. Isn't that beautiful?
That's pretty cool.
So that comes back to the creative power and, asking ourselves, like, hey, like, if you're a creator, guided by love, do you commit to you shaping your reality from the inside out? And I think we have that opportunity as creators, if we take the form of athletes or artists or entrepreneurs. So great to have coaches like you bring that out in the realm of basketball.
Yeah, I love it, man. Okay, big question time, my friend. If you could alter the space-time continuum and give young Jeremy Koenig one piece of advice, what would it be?
Oh man, that's what that big question was.
Yeah.
So I didn't know what that was going to be.
Well, that's why I get more spontaneity out of it.
Yeah, so I could go back, space-time continuum, and how old am I?
You can be whatever age you want,
okay,
man.
I'm just buying.
It could be like Back to the Future, where you just get in the DeLorean and go back to wherever you want.
Yeah, I'm just buying time with the extra question. What would I say? What would I say? Besides all those other things in Back to the Future and the lottery numbers, etc.
Yeah.
Dude, I would say, like, be in the moment. I know it sounds like so cliche, but it's like because the past is the past. It's done, right?
Yeah.
And the future can only create itself based on what you do in this moment. The amount of time that I've spent regretting things I've done in the past, or anticipating or being anxious about a future that never came. I mean, that's probably an extra 10 years of life. Being focused on the moment and, like, where am I right now? I'm on this call. I'm not thinking about the next call. Yep. I'm not thinking about the previous call, and we've had a pretty good conversation. And, and I think life is about stringing together moments like that. Athletes will call that flow. I mean, any athlete listening is like, yeah, man, like you talk about space-time continuum, like when I hit that perfect start and that perfect transition into top speed flying, time like slows down, and I can count on my hands, probably one hand, the amount of times that's happened in my life. And, so sure, sprinting would be one. My wedding day was another. When my daughter was born, that was one. A few moments in writing and work. But, so often have I just been, tempted to dwell on the past and control a future that I have no business trying to control. Yeah.
Yeah. So what's the saying? Something along the lines of, like, depression is living in the past and anxiety is worrying about the future, or something like that.
Yeah.
It's so true.
Yeah.
When you think about it like that versus when you're just in the moment, everything is so much easier.
Yeah, I get it. I got a, what is it? The Kung Fu Panda one with Master Oogway. It's something like, the
great movie references today.
I know, right? we didn't even get to the Matrix, which is my favorite. And that's okay. We can do that next time. But the point is like, the past is history. The future is a mystery, but the present right now is a gift. And that's why it's called the present. Right.
Yeah,
so
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. Okay. Last but not least, our lightning round. Okay. 4 fairly short questions. Your answer can be as long or short as you like. Speaking of the present, how has having a young daughter kind of shaped you and helped you kind of refocus your life and your energy?
Yeah. Well, I tell you, when she came into the world, we did a home birth, so that was terrifying in its own thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
And just like I literally got to hold life in my hands. Like saying that for anybody that has that should probably be enough. And then it was like, oh, I have no idea what I'm doing. Right.
Yeah.
And then it was like instant respect for my parents and parents everywhere, despite all their flaws. And then it was a complete new definition of human performance for me. Whereas before I thought, podiums and medals. Now I thought creation of life, and every day is a creation and an opportunity, to mold that human into potential. So I think it's definitely humbled me. And in terms of that, and then just humility also. It's like, well, sure, my wife and I, we conceived, but the whole process was like a letting go. Like we had, like at every stage there were things we were worried about and concerned about. And look, I'm not saying, you get apathetic about your child's life. I'm just saying there's we've sequenced Brooke's DNA, and I bring that to the GP and the pediatrician, and we have like all the life events lined up. Like, okay, yeah, here's your recommendation, but here's also her DNA. So like, now what's your recommendation? So I do get to bring the best of me to her, and I think I think that's really cool. Yeah, that's the biggest change. Yeah,
I can't imagine being your kid's doctor. That would just be like so overwhelming. Like, this guy is about to just grill me right now.
Well, the good news is I used to be, I had a golden retriever, and I was like the same way with the vets. But then I realized I was like, I got to change my approach, and we're all on the same team, right? So
sure.
So and then it's like, I have access to the DNA and I know a lot about DNA, but I still bring in a counselor because I got an emotional bias that needs to be corrected. So I try to be chill. I got a really good partner. My wife's trained in like holistic nutrition. So between the two of us, it's like, I'm like tech and she's touch, and it's like, it's a good balance.
It is a good balance.
Yeah.
Okay. Number 2. I want to hear about this podcast you started.
Yeah, me too. So you and I met through Eric Malzone, who's helped me lift that off the ground, and he really encouraged me, and I started recording last year, and he's like, man, just getting that first one out was like
hard, man.
Oh, you just like want to tear down your reality and sabotage everything, and like, why am I even doing this? So like but what is it? Like so the podcast is called The DNA of Things, and it's named in such a way that I'm going to start the podcast on all things DNA. Because I have network there. I have some really interesting people on there, like CEOs, founders, just on the cutting edge of DNA technology, like digital transformation. I've got some Olympic coaches on there. So like now it's starting to kind of fan away from DNA. When I say the DNA of things, it's deliberately vague in its definitions, a little bit of abstractness there, where it's like, I can say the DNA of DNA, but then I can say the DNA of human performance. I can say, the DNA of the cosmos. So I see it really pulling together, all things that I'm interested in. I minored in a philosophy degree as I did my genetic stuff. And so I really want to work on the intersection of the physical, which is like the actual physical DNA, but then the spiritual, it's like, again, it's this divine code, and it's information transferred over 4.2 billion years. Like, what is being said to us in terms of consciousness? And then, on the mental side, I would call that more of like the stuff we're building on top of, and again, the planning in the future. And then, emotionally, how does this deepen our humanity and our relationship, not just to our species, but other species, and, who are we choosing to become? So right now it's very much focused on the physical realm. Yeah. That's what the first, I think, season will be. But I can already start to see it evolving into something else. And what's really cool is that as you know, this AI stuff, you get the show notes and so you've actually, every show you do, you've got an essay, and so I can like put all these shows together and do a meta analysis of like, what the hell am I talking about? because
right.
Because I bring people on the show that I'm interested in. We have really good conversations, but what are we talking about? And it seems to me right now it is about how do we optimize our individual physicality so that we can explore deeper physical domains, deeper spiritual essence and understanding, and then build in that vision so that we are all connected and we level up our whole species. So it's very meta. But right now, I think your listeners will think it's cool. It's hopefully it's the right dose of some of the things we've been talking about in terms of activating our biology.
I love it. Okay, number 3. This one should be easy. How'd you become known as the DNA guy?
Well,
that's a pretty cool nickname.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I am. I think Eric just started calling me that.
Well,
and well, to be fair, actually, because I was like a scholar and also, jock, let's say, if I'm using stereotypes, or geek and jock. So in the sprinting world or the track world, people be like, oh yeah, it's the DNA guy. But then, in the DNA world, be like, oh, it's the track guy, right? So it's like wherever you're out of context, that's kind of the name people give you. And so especially when I work across disciplines, interdisciplinary, I tend to bring the DNA. So that's why people call me the DNA guy. It's not to say I'm the best DNA guy in the world. It's just I might happen to be the one who knows the most about DNA in the room for that moment. So I think that's how it started coming up. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I like it. Mm-hmm. Okay. Last but not least, what is next for Jeremy Koenig?
What is next?
What are you working on? What are you excited about? Anything?
Yeah, I would say the big focus for me right now is getting the podcast out, because I know that's helping me, write my book, which is really everything that I've learned from my entrepreneurial pursuits, through that lens of DNA and human performance and with an eye on the future, but in a way that I'm taking the advice that I said I would give that previous younger version of me, which is to be here now, but not deluded on what's coming. And so I'm really taking this work and I'm writing it because I feel like I have to, and I'll tell you, it feels like really what it is. It's a family manifesto. So that is, here's the information that I would give my daughter to live the best life ever. And the thing that I started thinking was, well, if I could love everybody the way that I love my daughter, then wouldn't that be a nice world? So I do think that there would be elements of this that I would want to. Well, I would already coach my founders, my entrepreneurs through, but I imagine it, just being something that I'd like to share broadly. Yeah. It's like, hey, here's what I understand about humanity as measured by DNA and some other things, and all said and done, maybe if you take some of these insights and adapt them into your own operating system, maybe you add anywhere from 10 to 50 years of health span to your life. Like that's what I would like for.
That'd be pretty cool.
Well, I mean, that's what I'd love to do for my daughter. And so if you can achieve your goals and be around to enjoy them and pass them on. So that's the big focus, and I think I'm going to get there through the podcast. So that's what I'm focused on.
Okay, so I lied. I've got one more follow-up question to that. for people that are listening, obviously, if they're still listening, they are podcast fans.
Okay.
And they're interested in what you're doing. Do you have one or two shows that maybe would resonate with this audience? Did you say you had Dan Pfaff?
I do have Dan Pfaff on there. Yeah. I think this audience will definitely like Dan Pfaff. I think they'll like Eric Corum, just because that gets into the whole athlete monitoring. There's a guy I had on from the Noetic Institute, so the the Institute of Noetic Science. It was founded by that astronaut, I can't remember which one, who saw Earth. Anyway, they do this far out science, and we talked about his book, which was like Why Vibes Matter. So it talks about consciousness, super consciousness, meta consciousness, and he was trained as a molecular biologist. So we really kind of so I think those are really cool. And you know what, the one I'm launching this week is the founder of HTMA, which is hypertrophic myocardiopathy. So that's like an enlarged heart issue. She's a founder, and there's just a really interesting riff that we run in there, and she actually talks about her heart transplant and what that's like.
Oh, wow.
So, I mean, that was just such a metaphysical experience. But she's trying to build a future to cure disease, and it's through a precision medicine practice. So, yeah, there's a few on there that are interesting. But I'd say, for this audience, the top one is just Dan, because of who Dan Pfaff is. I think that's an easy place to start. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, I tell you what, fellow listener, if you're still tuned in here, I'm going to link to the DNA of Things, the show, and then I'll get 3 or 4 of these linked in as well. So they were very easy to find. But with that being said, Jeremy, I'm sure you have a million things going on right now. In fact, I know you do. I appreciate you taking the time and being so present with us here today. Where can my listeners find out more about you? So far I have DNA of Things, and I have sequencing.com is a consultancy. Yep. Where else can people find out more about you?
Yeah. So DNA of Things. Actually, it's the podcast is just called The DNA of Things. My website is drjeremykoenig.com, and my handles are all the same. So Twitter, Instagram, X. I don't use any of them, but I will. I got to get somebody to help me with that. Like I took a social media diet, so I'm going to get somebody to help me responsibly do that. Yeah.
I love it. Yeah, I love it. Yeah, you get the right person, and they can just take all of the elements from the podcast and use that to feed the social media platforms and algorithms.
Yeah, exactly.
For somebody like yourself, that's probably the easiest way to do it.
Yeah, it's easy to get sucked in. So, but I do promise to make a presence there if it's going to be something that people like. So, but that's where I am. Yeah, I'm everywhere. I'm Dr. Jeremy Koenig.
I love it. I love it. I'll make sure I get all of those links in the show notes. And Jeremy, man, this was amazing. Thank you so much for your time today.
My pleasure, Mike. Thank you so much for having me.